We are ready to attach the fins to the booster section here. And we need to make one other measurement. Okay, so the booster fins are not going to be flush. They actually extend down 1/8 of an inch, or about 3 millimeters. And so I'm just going to quickly mark these at 1/8 of an inch, so that I've got a visual guide as I put them on. And I'm going to take some wood glue and just put a very thin bead on the fins here. Okay, we actually don't want this to be very thick. And then I'm going to place this along one of the fin lines here. And again, I'm going to line up that little mark I just made right here. Okay, and then I'm going to pull it back off and let that glue get tacky for about half a minute, and then I'll come back and put it back on. My glue is tacky now, so I'm just going to go ahead and put this back on. Again, using my little pencil mark there to mark where the fin goes. Just apply some pressure there. Okay, and then sight down both ways and then on top. Everything looks nice and straight there. So I'm going to let that dry for 5 to 10 minutes and then go on to the next ones. If you want to use a fin alignment guide, now is the time to attach that. And I am going to do the rest of the fins off camera. The glue joints on my fins are now dry, and so I'm going to apply glue fillets to the joints. And again, I'm just going to use wood glue for this. You can use white glue as well. Just run some along each edge. I prefer to do facing fins at the same time, so just smooth that in. Okay, so now just let that dry horizontally for a while, and then we'll come back. While I'm waiting for the fillets on the booster to dry, I'm going to revisit the nose cone here. And previously I had put the contour putty on this, and it is completely dry now. So I'm going to sand this first with some 150 grit sandpaper to knock down the high stuff again. Okay, now notice most of the putty has been sanded away, and all that remains here are the little bits in the valleys that we had there. And now I'm going to move to 220 grit sandpaper. Now I'm going to wipe this very carefully with a little bit of alcohol. You can also use water, but keep in mind that the plastic model putty is water and turns out to be alcohol soluble. So I'm just doing this really briefly. I don't want to rub on it at all. Okay, and I'll let that dry. And then I'm going to prime this with a sandable primer. And that will help fill in any of the scratch marks left by the sandpaper here. After the fillets dried on my booster stage, it was structurally finished. And here I've added a couple of light layers of sandable fillable primer. And one of the things this is going to do is highlight places where I might have little gaps. For example, right here I've got a couple little bubble gaps in my fillet, one here as well. And I didn't necessarily notice these when it was just the glue there. And so the primer helps bring that out. So I'll take a little bit of plastic model contour putty and fill in the fillets that way. Probably go ahead and do it on all fins just to make it uniform. This type of primer will also slowly fill in the grain on the fins that was still left after the sanding sealer. Now if you add more sanding sealer, you get less grain and you don't have to do as much priming, or you can just ignore it altogether. The same thing with spirals here. Some people really like to fill in the spirals on the body tubes, and so using this type of primer and repeatedly adding it and sanding and adding and sanding will eventually fill in the spirals there. I'm not quite that compulsive about it, but probably by the end of this, between the priming and the paint, the spirals are going to be a lot less noticeable anyway. All right, I also sanded around the areas of the exhaust vents here for the gap staging. And so the primer will also fill in any little bits of sanding scratches and such there. All right, so I'm going to let this primer coat dry. Then I will repair my fillets there and then move on to actually applying some paint to this. Now we're ready to apply the forward fins onto the sustainer stage, and your tube should be marked like this. So there should be about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters here from the aft end of the sustainer stage to the actual markings here. Now if you have an older kit, it may extend all the way down to the aft end, in which case you need to make a mark there at that particular measurement, which yes is 2.5 centimeters. Okay, and start with the aft end of the root edge at that point. Okay, but if you've got the ones that are marked correctly, they'll just go right on there. And so, like we did with the booster fins, use some wood glue or white glue for this. This looks like white glue, but it's actually still wood glue. Alright, and we just want a thin film there. Okay, get that nice and even. And then go ahead and stick that into the proper place there and pull it back out. Let that get tacky for about 30 to 60 seconds, and then we'll come back and put it back on. Alright, my glue has become tacky, and I'm going to put it right back on where it was. Okay, and make sure that we are centered and aligned. Okay, let that set for about 5 to 10 minutes and then go on to the next ones. If you want to use a fin alignment guide, now is the time to apply that as well. I'm going to do the other 3 fins off camera and come back when they're finished. The fins are dry, and our next step is to attach the launch lugs. We assembled these earlier, and in the instructions these would have gone on before the fins, and I had left them off in order to allow the use of a fin guide. And so just like the fins, we're going to glue these on with wood or white glue, okay, using the spaces provided. And still, even though we've got the lines, make sure that they are actually straight. Okay, and once you've got one in place, go ahead and do the other. And like the fins, we don't need to do a lot of glue here. It's better to use a thin film. And then we will put fillets on everything later. Okay, so again, make sure that it's within the lines there. and then sight one to the other and make sure they're straight. Alright, so those look good, and I will let those dry for a good 20 minutes, and then we should be able to put the fillets on. Now, just as we did with the booster stage, I'm going to apply fillets to all of the fins. And as long as you keep the rocket horizontal, you can basically do all of these at once. Alright, now just let that dry horizontally. If you decide you want thicker fillets, or if you've got little bubbles or something in there that you want to cover up, wait till the first layer of fillets dries, and then you can go in either with some more glue or with some modeling putty and fill in anything that didn't get filled the first time. My fillets on the fins and the launch lugs are dry. And I don't see a whole lot of bubbling, although sometimes that shows up later when we do the priming. Alright, and also I have not forgotten about the ejection baffle and the upper body tube here. I'm going to keep these separate for now. Depending on how you like to paint, you may or may not want to do this. So if you prefer to paint the entire thing all at once and use masking tape to mask off the different sections, then you can go ahead and install the baffle like that. Alright, I'll have more detailed instructions coming up, but I'm going to paint the body parts first. And so this tube in the illustration is silver, whereas the rest of the rocket is white with some black fins as well. And I think it's just going to be easier if I don't have this attached to anything else and just do it silver all by itself. So my next step is going to be to prime both of these tubes and associated parts with them, and then go on to painting. Now, before we actually go to prime and paint the top tube here, which they're not going to call the payload tube, we do need to apply these two balsa hatches to it. Okay, and according to the instructions here, these are going to go 3 inches down from the forward end. Alright, so I'm just going to make sure I've got this marked forward. Okay, and so grab my ruler here. I'm just going to make a little mark here at 3 inches. Okay, and I'm just going to take this little piece of balsa here. This is going to be our hatch. And this is simply going to go on with some white glue or wood glue. Alright, and kind of like the fins, we don't need a big glop on here. What we need is a nice thin film. Alright, and make sure that you line up the grain of the hatch lengthwise with the tube. Alright, so we'll come back here. I'm going to put this first one on. Alright, and kind of make sure it's straight. And then they recommend using some masking tape to hold it in place until the glue dries. So here I'm going to put on my masking tape, tack that down. Alright, and then the second hatch is going to go just after that at 1/8 of an inch back, or 3 millimeters if you're metrically inclined here. And this is going to go on the same way. So again, we'll put a thin film of glue on here. Okay, and then that one also. Going right about there. Right. Try to keep those as aligned as possible. So there. Alright, and I'm just going to leave both of those in place and let that glue dry for about half an hour. Now we're also going to apply these bands here. Okay, so it may be hard to see them in the video, but there are actually some pre-cut self-adhesive bands. None of these will affect this right now. Okay, now there is this hatch 2 which goes over the lower hatch, but they say not to do that one until after painting. Alright, now my lower stage and my upper stage I have already primed, but that should be fine. This will stick to the primer. So I'm going to put those on next, and then I'll paint over those. Okay. Okay, so here's my main body tube of the sustainer, and we need band A, which is the thinnest one, and it's going to go flush with the forward end of the body tube here. So I'm just going to peel this off. I'm going to start it at the launch lug point here so that if we have gaps or overlaps, they won't be noticeable on the launch pad at least. Alright, and these are paper, not vinyl, so you can't use the wet method that you would use on a vinyl decal here. You just gotta carefully move it along. Alright, little tiny gap there, but that's pretty good. Probably due to my primer. So that one's in place. Alright, band B and C go on the booster. So here's my prime booster. Alright, so band B is going to go at 6 5/8 from the aft end. It's going to go right there. So it's going to go right underneath my vent holes here. Alright, 6 5/8 all the way around. Okay. So here I don't have a launch lug line, but I do have the engine hook line, so I'm going to do the same thing here. This is going to be facing away from people when it's on the launch pad. The hardest part is always getting that last bit to line up correctly. There we go. Alright, and then we've got band C, which are in quarter sections, and those go in between the fins at 1.5 inches. And to help keep things clarified, I'm going to mark next to each fin here. Okay, so I'm going to give this another light coat of primer so that I cover the bands, but I don't want to use so much that I lose the distinction of the bands there. Looks like it needs a little bit of sanding in a few places. Alright, but the rest of the bands and decals and hatch covers won't go on until after the paint is finished. I removed the masking tape after the glue had dried on the hatches here. And the tape did raise the grain a little bit on this, so I'm just going to lightly sand that with a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper here. There we go. Okay, and these are going to be covered up with decals later on anyway, so you don't have to worry about filler or things like that. And so this is going to go get primed, and then from there we'll start painting the entire rocket. Here I have all of my rocket parts primed. The upper tube, the payload section, is primed, but it's not dry yet, so I don't have it down here. Now, according to Rocketarium, we're going to put this whole thing together and paint it white. Okay. Now, the payload section is going to be silver, and so for this process, they recommend putting the nose onto the upper body, or onto the sustainer body tube here, and then attaching the booster to it. I prefer to paint these in separate parts like I have here. It's just easier to handle. Alright, now the instructions also recommend using white primer. I'm using this fillable sandable primer, which at least around here only comes in gray, but that's fine. Alright, and then once it's all painted white, then they suggest masking off all the rocket area here except for two fins. So on both the booster and the sustainer, two adjacent fins are going to be black. Now I'm going to do this in a little bit different way. I'm going to paint the black fins first and then mask that off and then paint the rest of the rocket white. For me, it's just easier to do it that way. Okay, you can do it according to your preference, but I'm going to go ahead and I will mask part of the body tube here just to prevent overspray. But really at this point my plan is to just paint those two black fins, and then if there's any overspray there, once the black fins dry, I can mask them off and then overpaint any black that remains on the rocket. It just means I might need to put another coat of primer on top after the black fins are done. So here I have almost all of the rocket parts painted. So the sustainer section here, the main body tube for that is done. I've got two black fins, two white fins. Same thing with the booster. Alright, now this is the payload section, and it has a base coat of white on it. And here I've applied the Hatch 2 white sticker, And now I'm going to paint this or overcoat this with silver paint to complete it. And then once we've got that done, we'll assemble the whole rocket. Here I have all of the pieces painted and we're ready to assemble the rocket. So here all I need to do on the booster is just remove my tape from the coupler, and it's pretty much ready to go at that point. Okay, we will have a couple of decals for it. Alright, the nose is fine for now. What we're going to do is install the ejection baffle here. So for that, just use some white glue or some wood glue, and we're going to put a bead of glue inside the forward end of the main body tube of the sustainer. Okay, and looks like I need to remark my tube here. So we just need to mark halfway down the coupler. That's going to be 1 inch or 25 millimeters. Alright, and then we're just going to put that in here, give it a little twist through the glue until we get to that point. Okay, I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes before we put the payload section on. The glue has set on the coupler, so now we're going to put the payload section in place. But before we do that, we need to string the shock cord. Okay, so just tie that onto the screw eye. If you prefer to use Kevlar, you may do that. You'll put it on the same way. Alright, so just put a double knot in this. Okay, pull it from all directions so any slippage occurs ahead of time here. And then we'll just put a little dab of wood glue on that knot and work it in there so it doesn't come unraveled. Okay, and then this is going to pass up through the payload section. Now the two hatches here should be toward the aft end. Alright, so pull that all the way up, and then we're going to run a bead of glue around here as well. I'm going to try and keep the shock cord out of it here, but we can clean it off if necessary. Alright, so pulling taut on the shock cord, now I'm going to pass this through. There's no orientation shown in the instructions, so I'm going to put my hatches opposite the launch lug. Kind of align it between two fins. Okay, and now I'm just going to pull this taut and hang it over the edge like this, and I'm going to allow it to dry standing up. That way it won't get back into the glue. Now over here on the other end of the shock cord, we can go ahead and place the shock cord through the eyelet there and tie that down. And once again, pull it from multiple directions to cinch that down. Put just a little dab of glue on there. And then on the free end, cut that back to about 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch so it doesn't get caught up inside between the body tube and the nose cone shoulder. And now I'm just going to let this dry as well. While the glue is drying on the shock cord, we'll go ahead and assemble the parachute. Now if you want to attach this directly to the nose cone, just follow the instructions. And you just pass all the loops through the eyelet there, and then pass the entire parachute through your loops, pull it taut. Alright, it's pretty self-explanatory in the instructions. Now if you've seen any of my videos, you know I don't like to do that. I prefer to put it on a snap swivel. So get yourself a snap swivel like this. You can get these in the fishing section of department stores and hardware stores and sporting goods stores. The size doesn't really matter as long as the snap portion is large enough to fit around the eyelet here without binding. Alright, so now first of all I'm just going to take all the parachute shroud lines in a loop on my finger, and then I'm going to grab the center of the parachute sheet with my other hand, and then I'm just going to pull those shroud lines taut and allow them to move a little bit back and forth, and we should have all of the corners of the parachute in approximately the same spot like we have here. Alright, up on this end I'm going to maintain a hold on those shroud lines. Alright, and then I'm going to take the swivel end of my snap swivel, pass the loops of the shroud lines through it. Alright, and I'm always hanging on back here so my shroud lines don't change in length. And I'm going to take the entire swivel, pass that through the loops, and then pull it back down so that it forms a knot there. Recheck my lengths, make sure I'm still good on that end. Alright, if you're not, you can just loosen that and try again. If you have it where you want it, then just take and put a little dab of glue on there to keep that from coming undone. Okay, and then when that glue is dried and you're ready to fly, just open up the snap here and then attach that to the eyelet and close it down. Preferably without getting the shock cord caught in it. Okay, now you notice I'm having some difficulty with this. This is big enough to go around there, but it is a little bit tight. Okay, and then you just fold up your parachute, put it inside the payload bay, put in your shock cord, and this is ready to fly. Okay, so structurally the rocket is done. I'm going to let that glue dry, and then we'll come back and put on the decals. For the decals, I'm going to do the 2 water slide decals first, and so that will be the United States decal here and the little swirl decal over here. And first I'm going to trim these a bit. Don't get too close there. Alright. And then this has been cut out, but it's not quite straight. Let's see if I can trim that a bit. Okay, so according to our instructions here, the United States decal is going to go on the lower stage. And the U is going to be about even with the tops of the fins there. Alright, and then kind of centered in between. So over here on the side I've got a little basin of water, just room temperature water. So I'm going to soak that in there. And this will probably take about 20 seconds. Just check it every so often to see if it's come loose. There we go. So you didn't want it so it just starts to slide like that. Alright, now this has got it oriented so the United States is upside down. I'm going to turn this around so it's right side up. Alright, now I'm going to place this approximately where I think it should go. And I'm holding the free end with my thumb there, and I'm just sliding the paper out from under it. Okay. And that looks pretty darn close all by itself. I think I will not try and make that any better. Okay, so now I'm just going to take a tissue here and squeegee off the excess water. Do this gently so you don't move the decal. Okay, I'm going to set that one aside to dry for a little bit. Okay, the swirl decal here is going to go on the upper stage on this fin. Okay, so again, let's go ahead and soak that in the water here. And likewise, this should take about 20 seconds, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. So we're going to check it here and see if it's loose yet. Put it back in. There we go. Alright, and that's going to go right about here. Okay, it doesn't give us a specific measurement. I'm just going to try and come close to what's on the illustration there. And once again, once you have it where you want it, go ahead and blot that off. Squeegee off the excess water. Alright, and we're going to let that dry for a few minutes and then come back and do the vinyl decals. For the vinyl decals, I've added a single drop of dishwashing liquid to my water, and this will be used to lubricate the decals. Okay, and now we've got some gold decals here, brown decals, and silver decals. Now the silver ones are going to go where we put the white bands earlier. Okay, so I'm going to come back to those later. I'm going to do the other ones here first. I'm going to set aside the brown. Okay, so we have bands 8, 7, and 9. So band 9 is going to be the thinnest one in the gold sheet here. And that is going to wrap around the body tube between the E and the D of United there. And just notice I've got a little bubble in that water slide decal. Let me see if I can work it down a little bit. Maybe. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put this one on, just peel it off. And here I'm just going to run it through my slightly soapy water. And this just makes it so it doesn't grab immediately. After the water dries, the glue will become permanent. Okay, so here, I'm going to try and put this right about in the middle. Whoa, okay, that is something we did not want to have happen. Okay, so be very careful of that. So I'm going to wrap this around and then come around with the other one. The idea here is to try and keep this as straight as possible. And mine are not quite meeting, probably due to the thickness of the paint. Alright, just try and give them as straight as possible there, and we'll call it good. We'll just face that side away from the audience on the launch pad. Alright, let's see if I can repair where it lifted up that decal. Alright, next we have band 8, which is a little bit bigger one here. And this is going to go flush with the forward end of the booster, which means it may run across our vent holes there. And if it does, we'll just have to trim around them. Okay, but you want this really close to the edge here. And if you're really talented, you can do it without the water. I'm not quite that talented most days. But when the booster and sustainer are coupled together, the gold stripes on each of them will form one big band. theoretically. Okay, and again we got a little bit of a gap there. I think that'll be okay. Right here, go ahead and squeegee that out. Alright, so that's it for the booster. Alright, over here on the sustainer we're going to do the same type of thing here. This is going to go flush with the aft end of the sustainer. Okay, that one lined up pretty good. We'll go ahead and remove any water there. Okay, next we have band 5, which is the brown one here. It's actually a fairly thin one. And that is going to go right at the joint between the body tubes. Okay, and that'll go in front of band A, which is one of the white ones there. Next we have the hatches, and these are going to go on the rectangular one here. So when we peel that off, we're going to leave a little notch behind it. Alright, so it should look like a square O there, and that is going to go on the forward hatch. Okay, and then back to the brown sheet here. The other hatch has what kind of looks like a 4 or a 7 on it. Not sure what it's supposed to be. The same way, we're going to leave the inside piece there. I'm going to reference this for just a moment. Okay, so this is going to go... Well, actually, the illustration shows it going like this, and that's not going to fit. And I don't have anything else to give me an idea here. So I'm going to go this way. Okay, next I have band 1, which is on the silver, and this is going to go on the forward end of the payload section. Again, you want it flush but not overhanging so it doesn't have a chance to bind the nose cone. Okay, and then band 2. So here again I'm going to try and start in the middle. I have to floss my way through there. Okay, and then just let these wrap around either side. Alright, then band 3. right below the lower hatch. Alright, and then band 4 is going to go on the other side of the brown band there. Now the last decals are the segmented band 6 here. They're in 4 parts. And kind of like we did with the white bands on the booster, these are going to go between the fins at 3/8 of an inch from the leading point there. Now I'm going to do this off camera just because it's going to be kind of tedious to do it and it's going to take a lot of video time. So I'll just put these on off camera and come back when it's finished. Alright, here's my completed model with everything attached here. Here are the bands that I put on last, and for the launch lug side there I did have to cut it in half and just run it up onto the launch lug. Alright, but everything else here is in place. Now I would recommend allowing this to dry for a full 24 hours to let all the decals adhere. And then if you want to give some additional protection for the decals, apply a clear coat, probably acrylic. I found it's the least likely of them to cause bubbling or crinkling of the decals. All right, but with that, this ends my video here. I hope you had fun building this. Have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.